All right, guys, welcome back to God's Country. Oh, wait, that's the shooting. We'll do both. God's Country Shooting and Outdoors, because we're going to be doing this video on that channel too. But we're also going to be uploading this to my other channel, Standing in the Gap with Chad. It's been a little while. We've been trying to get this interview set up for a while, but we finally got it together. We're going to be talking today with Brother Nick Shortridge. Wonderful guy. We've known each other off and on for many years, but I really didn't know his testimony until in the last 6 months or so. And I began to do these videos. I knew I wanted to do inspirational testimonies, and this is one of those testimonies that was one of the first ones that came to mind. So Brother Nick Shortridge, he's got a lot to say. It's up to him how deep he goes into his testimony. But just a little background, he never sleeps. I think he's inhuman because he works so many different jobs and does so many things. Prisons, prison ministry, construction company, pastor of a church, guides fishing, and I don't know what all that is. But Brother Nick, it's so good to finally sit down with you. How are you doing? I mean, you got a beautiful church. How do you do it without never sleep?
So the Lord, I feel like if we give our time to the Lord, then He'll give us back abundantly.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the way that I do. Amidst all of the other stuff, I work part-time at UPS every morning.
Oh, wow. So you load trucks. Okay.
And stuff there. So I just try to use everywhere that I go to be a witness.
Yeah.
For the Lord. And He's opened a lot of doors through that, been able to lead me into the Lord on construction sites and wearing nail aprons and bowing down to pray and blessing the Lord from housetops. And really just literally did some Zoom meetings at the Southwest Regional Jail. Me and I work with just blessed to work with some good Christian guys.
Yeah.
A lot of them has had the same testimony as me. Some are here today helping work at the church, and they've come out of drug addiction, out of jails, and out of prisons, and just the revolving door that life, encounters. And then, but when they come out, I think that's why God has blessed me to be, in the construction business. I'm able to work a lot of the guys that get out of jail and get out of prison, to give them a start, because I know where they've been.
Yeah,
and I know what God can do. That's the main thing, is I know what God can do with people's lives.
Yeah. I we both love hunting and fishing and stuff, and I do want to touch base on that. But before we get into that, for me, that's kind of going to be a little bit of a cherry on the top.
Yeah.
And for some of my gun nuts like us, that'll be a cherry on the top.
Yeah.
But I want to start with this first, because this is kind of what helps make everything else come into focus.
Yeah.
I'll leave it up to you how much you want to share your testimony. But when people meet you today, they meet the Nick that God saved. But a lot of people don't know the Nick that went through the loss of your parents, drugs, and all that.
Yeah.
So I want you to kind of elaborate what you feel comfortable, and tell us about what led you to the Lord.
So I was as Chad said, the people that know me today, they say, I can't imagine you ever being the man that you say that you were. But then it was about a month ago, I guess, a good friend of mine passed away. I'd been to church with since he had gotten saved. And I met a friend there, and she said, I can't believe you're a pastor. She said, I thought you would have been the last person in the world that I would have ever thought would have ever went to church. And she said, as a matter of fact, I figured you would have been dead by now. And had I continued down the road that I was on, I surely would have. So when I was 19, I had graduated high school, gotten out of school, and went to college at East Tennessee State University. Was in college to be a physical therapist, and had gotten out for the summer, and between somewhere around February, my dad had an affair with my mom. She found out about it. We weren't Christians. Weren't from a Christian background. None of my.
No, wait a second. You really didn't know anything about the Lord Church at that time?
Nothing about the Lord. Never grew up in. I wasn't even one of the Christmas church goer or Easter church. We just never went. Good people.
Right.
Now we were, my family, they didn't.
Good morals.
They didn't fight, cuss, drink, steal. Nothing that, a regular Christian. A Christian would look at them and say, well, they're fine. They're good people.
They look great on the
outside. They do, yeah, but there was that black seam on the inside.
Yeah.
So they had an affair. My dad had an affair with my mom. They couldn't really, never could overcome it. There was, seemed like they would have some good days and then some bad days. I saw more bad days, trips to the emergency room with my mom. It got pretty physical. I saw my dad throw the Christmas tree across the house, and just lots of fights and verbal abuse both ways, not just my dad to my mom, but my mom and my dad. And it was July the 30th. July 19th was my mom's birthday. We had been out. I had been out partying at this time. I was already kind of dabbling in drugs and stuff, just as a college student and all of that. I had come home for the summer because Johnson City's not that far, and I'd come home and I was working in the mines with my dad, and we'd gotten off from work on a Friday night. It was my mom's birthday. The next just in a couple of days, so we was going to have a little birthday party, and we stopped and got her a cake and some dinner and all that, and we went in, and I waited on my mom. She was late getting home. She was never late getting home, and we had a picture perfect home. Really, I mean, we had a nice home, and it's really the Southwest Virginia story. Coal miner. My dad was a coal miner. My mom was a school teacher. We grew up in a single wide trailer in Buchanan County, and then as mom and dad worked and we grew, we went to a double wide, and then eventually moved to Abington. I mean, that's most of Southwest Virginia's story. That's what goes on.
That's the Jeffersons moving on up story.
That's right. So there we were, and when we had that, we was having that dinner there that night. Was waiting on mom to get home. She was a little late. And I was in a hurry. I was at the time I was 19 years old. Had some friends waiting on me at a party. It was Friday night. I was working in the mines. Was making big money. Didn't have any bills, anything like that. So I wanted to go out and be with my buddies. And luckily, thank the Lord, I waited on my mom to get home. She got home. And we had some birthday cake and had dinner. It was. I saw my dad and mom. That was the happiest that I had ever seen them. Probably ever, definitely since the time that my mom was shut down about being unfaithful. But I saw them dance in the living room floor. I've never seen that. My dad, he was a strong, quiet, tough, guy. Didn't show any emotion and sure wasn't going to dance,
Right.
But they were slow dancing there in the living room. That was my last image of them alive. I went to the party that night, laid down all that night, drinking and drugs and partying. And then Saturday rolls around. I still didn't come home. I still laid out and drank and partied all that night. And come up Sunday morning, I had got up and had a friend of mine that was with me. And, we went back to the house and I told him, I said, why don't you go in with me? I said, that might take a little heat off of me, because even though I was 19 years old, I still looked too big for Daddy to whoop me for laying out all weekend.
Right.
So
I
I asked him to go in. He had gotten his haircut. My dad used to aggravate him all the time. Him and I both, we had long hair. Daddy would always tell him and say, why don't you get a haircut the real job? Just picking at him. So we went in, he went in with me, and I had a spiral staircase. I just visualized it in my head every time I, did my testimony. We went up, I circled up the spiral stairs, and what I saw would never leave my mind. I saw my mom was laying in the floor at the top of the steps. And I didn't know what was wrong. Just a silence. It's just the only way I could just explain it. There was just a silence in the air. I mean, I ran to her, and I had some CPR training. I've been from the mines, and I tried to get my mom out the mouth. There was nothing I could hear but blood gurgling in her lungs, and I knew that. And then I saw my dad was laying over then. I looked over, and there was my dad. He was laying on the floor over to the side of her. And there was some other stuff. We lived in a 3-story house at the time. I was just kind of trying to put pieces together in my mind, but I went over and tried to give my dad, CPR as well, and it was the same thing. And I really don't know what happened after that, as far as in that who called what, or what really went on. So
I guess at that point, though, your shock begins to set in a little bit. More questions than answers. I can't imagine. I can't imagine finding my parents dead. How did? Well, go ahead. But I mean, how did you handle this?
I mean, even though I was not, and I know this may go cross-grain to some religions and some, religious people. But God was with me even then. I was not saved. I would not have went to heaven, but God loves us. I mean, the Bible says that God commended His love towards us while we were yet sinners. That Christ died for us. So in that, had it not been for the merciful arm of God, I don't know what would happen. And like you said, it was like shock, and I really didn't know because it was on. I assumed things happened on the 3rd floor because of the items that were. We didn't have a railing at the top. We just had some antique stuff, kind of decorations around that top ledge. There wasn't much up there. We had a pool table, just
kind of a game room.
Yeah, just like a game room. And so we had just some whatnots, kind of blocking the edge. And my first thought was a fall or a fall. I really wasn't sure. And then, the police arrived, and even in my own mind, it's even kind of sketchy. I don't know if to just block that out or what. I really don't even know what happened during that time, but I do know, there was a gun found and all of that. And then after, so it was it was a few days after the funeral. I don't even remember where I stayed at or where I went to or anything, during that time. But I remember being at a funeral home in Buchanan County. We had my mom and dad at the same funeral home at the same time. Dad was on one side and my mom was on the other side. And as a little boy, there's nobody like your mom. I mean, I love my dad too.
Yeah.
And still,
But there's a real bond.
And then your son, So I remember screaming out, at the nursing home or at the funeral home, he killed my mom.
Well, wait a second. Is that what happened?
That is what happened. So, after they had found a gun, and that was how it was listed anyway. It was murder-suicide that my dad had killed my mom. And I assumed that the altercation took place, upstairs, and that there was a fight, and maybe he shot her and then he killed himself, and they both ended up on that bottom floor. The gun was, I don't know if the gun was hid, maybe the gun was hid from me, just the Lord tucked it under them, or maybe it was under the couch. I don't even know. The police did, they said you can get the gun back, and I didn't. I wanted it in a way, but I didn't want it in another way. I had still, just very unstable. I mean, 19 years old, only child. I had some, just a grandmother on one side and a grandfather on the other side. Some aunts and uncles. but no real close, not like a church family, you know what a church family is.
Oh, absolutely. A church family, when you get into a good church, and it's not just a good church, but, you know, Brother Donnie Melvin's church and this church and just different churches, they're a community. Even though they're individual churches, we see that we are a body of Christ. And when you get into that fellowship and into that family, it's so much better than a normal family. I mean, it really is. But I want to ask you a question. You know, we recognize that God has a way of sparing us, and sometimes just a little accident slows us down to keep from getting where we're going at the normal time, because that was God's way of hindering us to keep us out of trouble. It sounds like what happened between your mom and dad hadn't been that long before you. Do you think that in the heat of the moment that God spared you from your dad not thinking about it, but maybe killing you as well?
Yeah, for sure. And that was some of the family tried to console me with that. It was like, because they were still really weren't cold yet. You know, whenever I had got to them. I don't know, man. It's just so hard to even. Not that you relive it, but it's just hard to even grasp. You know what you can take. You know.
Yeah, I can
imagine. I think it was at about 2:00 was when I had gotten home, and or maybe 2:30, and they presumed it to have happened around 2. So I was just on the verge, you know, of being there. So I've lived my life thinking, what if I would have stayed home? Could I have prevented it?
Yeah.
Then the other side is like, what if you would have been home? It would you too, you know. And
because in the heat of the moment, you know, people do things in emotion,
for sure,
that, you know, they would have normally done in the right mind. But emotions, when they get a hold of us, they really they show a bad side of us, whether we're normally that or not.
Sure.
And you know, I'm glad that God worked it out for His glory in the long run. But I can't imagine, you know, what you went through. But wow, please continue, because it gets better. God brought you through all of this. It sounds like even when you didn't know Him, He knew you.
Yeah.
So please, sorry, continue.
So at that time, after the funeral, I remember, you know, like I said, I remember sitting on one side of the funeral home. Lots of anger, lots of unforgiveness. And of course, I was lost. I was in sin. Just had, you know, anger towards it. You know, my dad, some of my dad's side of the family, not a great deal towards this side of the family, because they really didn't have anything to do with it. But still, like you said, just a million emotions going through you at one time. But since, you know, of course, since then, I've found forgiveness, you know, I mean, for my dad. Gosh, just so I don't want to fast forward too much, but there's a lot more that went before that. God's been able to use, you know, that testimony through forgiveness of my family to touch other men. If I don't forget, we'll get that in a minute. But from that time, so the door had already been opened up to drugs and alcohol and women and all of that. It was already, you know, wide open in my life. So at that point, being an only child, 19 years old, no supervision, a house, you know, at that time, I had a house paying 3 cars, I think is what we had at the time, maybe a 4th, counting my dad's sort of junk work car, you know, they go back and forth to the coal mines. Insurance, food, lights, all of that. I didn't even know how to write a check at that time.
You really got thrown into adulthood.
It was be an adult or die. I would have rather died, to be honest, at that time. I won't take the cop out and say that I turned to drugs and that I did drugs to cope with my problems and all that. I did drugs because I liked doing drugs. I mean, I liked getting high. I liked smoking marijuana. I liked where it took me. You know, I liked not having to cope, not just with that, but with anything. But then, you know, one thing just escalated into another, and now at this point, because the door was already open, I'd do anything. So I really got bad. Um, it was from, you know, it was marijuana, snorting a little bit of cocaine, taking a few pain pills, you know, here and there, and just kind of recreational type weekend party and stuff like that. Because I was still, you know, I was still in school to be a physical therapist, or was out working at the time. But that opened the door up. That, and then I just shared some of my testimony with some guys from Southwest Regional Jail a little while ago. I had a couple $100,000 insurance money under a cowboy head in my basement. And, you know, a 19-year-old kid with a drug addiction and a couple $100,000 shouldn't take long to kill him. You know, I mean, in all honesty. So I really got into hard drugs at that time. I started doing lots of cocaine, and then I started.
Did it become more of was it addiction, or was it more than addiction?
It was definitely 100% addiction. It was, and honestly, it became me. It became who I was. I got to the point where I couldn't function. I couldn't go out to the store. I couldn't go to the Walmart. I couldn't go anywhere. Couldn't be around other people, because now it went from me just buying drugs and using them to party on the weekend. I was buying cocaine, and I was actually rocking it up and making crack out of it and selling it. So from my own, so people were coming, you know, to my house, you know, 30 cars a day. Wow, we're pulling in and buying hard drugs and bad and marijuana, and, you know, LSD, just anything that I could get, I was doing and selling. And I've done. I mean, it had to be God. As you know, I've known people that have overdosed on less than what I was doing, you know, at that time, and would think like I've been with them that overdosed, and I think, how did they, you know, they rushed off to the hospital, and it'd go through my mind, me thinking, you know, how did they overdose, and I did, you know, because knowing good well I'd done twice as much, you know, wow. That's what they had, and I say none of that to lift up the drugs or addiction, anything like that. Anybody that knows me knows better than that. I say that to just show the strong hand of God that was working.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, at that time. So party after party after party, and years after selling, and addiction, and like I said, it became who I was. So I wouldn't leave the house. I wouldn't leave the house unless I was high, because it wasn't me. Yeah. So I had become the product that I was using. Yeah. And was everything. And I would go. It was almost as if, looking back now, it was almost as if I was trying to kill myself, which I was not with drugs. I wasn't trying to do that, but it seemed like, because I would do speed and stay up. I've stayed up as much as 6-7 days straight. Never went to bed. Never went to sleep. Just doing drugs. I weighed 125 pounds. I had to drink orange juice and take vitamins just to be able to, you know, not just to go to the bathroom, just to be, because I wouldn't eat. You can't eat on the speed and stuff. And I mean, I was in a terrible mess. And I found myself, I'd gotten down. And when you've got money and when you've got drugs, you're surrounded by people. Oh yeah. You've got lots of friends. Yeah. And a lot of people will say, and even my parents, they had told me, you know, well, you just think they're your friends and they're so-called friends. And I've heard others, and I've even had the same conversations. But as I look back, they were just in addiction the same way I was. Yeah, and they really had access. Right, and they really were my friends. You know, I mean, they really were. We were doing bad things, and we needed Jesus, both of us. But we were there for each other. And that's what kind of the church community needs to see. It's not just about your baby and your child being protected from this monster that's selling them drugs. That monster that's selling them drugs needs Jesus too. Jesus died for that man just the same as he did for your baby.
Absolutely.
And that man is somebody else's baby too. So us as a church community, that's something that God has really taught me.
Yeah.
Being a pastor, being in drug addiction, or have been in it, in the past, God has shown me a lot more than religion.
Yeah. It's easy. It's kind of like a complacent status when you've been in church a long time and you've never really been around things like this. You don't understand what they're going through or why they're doing this. But Jesus died for them.
That's right.
Just like he did for me. Now, if I remember correctly, there was a point in time where you almost got killed.
Yeah.
Tell us about
that.
A couple of times.
Several times. I was at a party, an outdoor party. I've always loved the outdoors, but I was at a party in Feather Camp. Some of our local listeners will know where that's at.
Yeah.
On Government Road in Nebraska. I was up on top of the mountain there. Got in a fight up there. Didn't care. That's was what was really dangerous about anybody. Is when they don't care. They don't care to go to jail. They don't care to die. Go through. That's exactly right. So I was up there and had gotten in a fight. And, these guys, they went off one side of the mountain. And we kind of forgot about it and got back to partying. And then they come back up over the mountain. Guns blazing, just firing into a group of us.
Wow.
Luckily, there was cars and some firewood and stuff that we had piled up there that took the blows instead of us.
Mm.
Another time was at a drug deal in Charlotte, North Carolina, buying lots of cocaine. And with that much cocaine involved, I mean, it would be, 20 years automatic, in prison. And I was outside, a vehicle and out around some property that I shouldn't have been around, which during a drug deal. When a man had come running back outside and he said, what are you doing? What are you doing? He was making the deal inside. And I said, well, I was just messing around. And he said, get back in the car. He said, I was going to the bathroom. And he said, I saw a guy with a gun out the window. And I said, what are you doing? This is the guy that was inside. And he said, I'm going to smoke this cracker. And he said, I looked out, and it was you. So that was how close. I mean, it was instance from dying. But I had gotten so low myself, it really wouldn't have took anybody else. I remember one of the times I said, I had my bedroom was in my basement and completely dark because like a lot of other drug addicts. I mean, you stay up all night, right? That's it. You fellowship with the darkness, and so I'd stay up all night. And when the sun, I can remember the same place where my dad killed my mom on the top floor. I'd be up there shooting pool, and that sun would start coming up, and the light would start coming in, and I'd go down just like a man, just get in the basement, close the doors, and try to block it off. And
so you had that whole house, and you chose to just seclude yourself in the basement to live.
Yeah, and I sat in there on the edge of my bed one night with a sawed-off shotgun in my mouth. And look back, just thinking, man, just end it. You got no family, you got no job, you got no life, you got no wife, you got no kids, you got no future. Just do it. Just do it. I could just hear it. And I've said oftentimes, I can still taste the gun barrel in my mouth. I mean, just that close so many times to death. But God, God, He intervened so many times in my life that I should have died. And then, and that's not to mention the car accidents. I totaled every car that I ever owned from the time I got my driver's license till the day I got saved. Every car I ever owned, multiple cars. Even I totaled a good friend of mine. He was my best friend at the time. Totaled his brand new Mustang, still had 30-day tags on it. Totaled it, rolled it at number 11. The people behind, they come running up, broke every window out of the car. They thought we were dead. They said, we got behind you. They said your car was just rolling.
Did at that point, did you have a death wish, or was it just strictly you had no fear, no care?
No fear, no care, not do anything. Wow. The guy that was with me in that accident broke his collarbone, maybe his shoulder. I think broke his shoulder, dislocated it, broke his collarbone. But, multiple times, and I mean, I could go on and on about it, but for time's sake, the Lord delivered me out of those. It had been several years through my addiction, and it had just grown. So some of the friends that I had earlier partied with that were just, occasional weekend warriors, if you want to call it, that would drink on the weekend and work all week. Those guys had, dissipated out of my life, and then I got to the guys that were a little more hardcore, and I partied with them, and then eventually when they moved on, then we got to the guys that were, pretty big in drugs, and that was their livelihood, was selling drugs and selling lots of drugs. And those were the people that I hung around with. And the other people, they told me later on, even the friends that I had early on that were still in their addiction, they said, man, we couldn't be around you anymore. We were afraid of you. We were afraid what was going to happen. And I ended up in jail so many times. I mean, it would look like, finally the light would have went off or something. Never went to the new jail down here, but in the old jail in Abingdon, was there multiple times. Johnson City down there, everything from robbing gas stations, the drugs. It just escalates. The story just goes on and on. But to fast forward to the good part. So we were having a big party one night. There were probably 75 people at the house. Cars lined all the way out the driveway, up the road. Lots of people there, lots of drugs and stuff going on. Somebody came upstairs. I was upstairs shooting pool, and they said, "There's somebody out here to see you. There's a woman out here to see you." That's what they said. And I came down the steps, and sure enough, there was this woman in my driveway, and I knew her. I knew her well. I had dated her daughter in high school, and her and my mom had become good friends. This woman that was currently in my driveway, her mom and my mom had become good friends. And it was almost like my mom knew that something was going to happen between her and Dad, because she had told this lady, she said, "Take care of me. If anything happens to me, take care of me."
Let me ask you this. For timeline's sake, how long had this been? So, I mean, the downhill battle started at 19, but how old were you now? How many years had this been going on?
I was in my mid-20s, early to mid-20s, to 23, so maybe about 4 or 5 years. Okay. Yeah, just long enough to get really deep in it. Well, then, so this woman was there, and I knew her well, because the whole time of my drug addiction, this was at the right at the era, and so some of your listeners with a little age on like us, they'll remember when caller ID first came out. You had that little box that was beside your cordless phone, your recorded phone. And I would see her number, and I would think, man, I hate to answer this, because it was the only stability in my life that I had to deal with. Yeah. My grandmother came over, like I said, none of my people were saved. My grandmother, she came over one time with a baseball bat and ran all of my friends off, or tried to run them off.
That sounds like my mom's family.
Just whoop all of them. That's the answer. Yeah. So then, and I even had, and I can understand. I don't get mad about it, or wouldn't. Even had family that accused me of doing it, because, they knew I was dabbling in drugs, and they knew, like my mom and dad, that was not the kind of people, you know what I mean? They were not in and out of jail. They did not have psychiatric problems. They were not, my dad was not an alcoholic. My dad was not an abusive man. Yeah. He was a normal, work every day, just your average American man, above average American man. Yeah, he was a great man. He really was. And he just snapped. You know, I mean, he just broke. But this woman, I would see her number come up on that caller ID, and I wouldn't answer it. And I started not answering it. And then I knew I got to learn 20 minutes after I didn't answer, there was a knock on the door. And it was her. So it took her 20 minutes to get from her house to mine. No matter if it was 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the day,
Yeah.
she would show up. And this went on forever, you know. So finally, this woman, she's standing in my driveway, and all of these cars, all of these people, all of these drugs. And she looked at me, Chad, and she said, "You're evil." She said, "I can't come any closer to your house than what I am right now." She said, "I just feel the presence of evil all around." And she looked me in the eye and she said, "You're going to die lost and you're going to go to hell." That's what she told me. And I thought, even though I didn't think I was bad enough to go to hell. I didn't think I deserved it. You know, I didn't kill my mom, Dad. I didn't rape, murder, and pillage. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I felt like that those were the people that you had to be a hardcore Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson to really deserve hell. I didn't realize if
You've been the best person in the
Jesus.
world, but without the blood,
That's it.
without that remission of
He
sins.
said, you must be born again.
Yeah.
Not an option. Not an option.
And even Nicodemus knew the law. Nicodemus, by all standards of that day, was a good, righteous man according to the law. But he had to be born again.
So was Paul.
Yeah.
Great man. Writer 2/3 of the New Testament. Law.
Yeah. Law. And what a testimony. He was a murderer.
That's right.
You know, we forget about this sometimes. We forget about this a lot of times. But when we look at different characters in the Bible, you know, Paul was a murderer. Yeah. King David, the best king, you know, probably in history, was a murderer.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible is full of people that deserved hell. Rahab was horrible, but she stood for Israel. So we can go on and on with the different people.
Yeah.
But God loves every one of us, not just the good people.
That's right.
That He really loves everybody, which is why Jesus could sit with the sinners.
Right.
Wasn't that He took the sin, that He knew being around them, showed them the light.
Yes, right.
You know. Anyways, I don't want to get off on a tangent. I want you to keep talking, but she really opened your eyes. It sounds like.
Well, she stood there and she told me that, and it's still like my only thought was, how do I get this woman out of here? You know, that was really it, because I mean, it's having a big party, and every time that she showed up, I described it to the guys today that from the jail. I said it's like when you were driving drunk, or maybe if you were speeding or breaking the law or doing something, all of a sudden you saw blue lights in the rearview mirror, and you just immediately felt that gut feeling. You knew you were guilty. You knew. That's the way I felt every time she come around.
Yeah, it was a very sobering.
It was. It would sober me up. You know.
Yeah.
I think, man. So she stood at my driveway and she told me that, and with a boldness too. You know, she didn't back down, and she said, "I'll make you a deal." She said, "If you will go to church with me tomorrow night," she said, "I'll leave you alone. I'll quit calling, quit coming around." I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, deal, because I wanted to shed this woman. Yeah. She had aggravated me to death for the last 4 years or 5 years to try to get me in church and all this. And I thought, church is not what I need.
You know, I've thought about this a lot. There's the analogy of grass is greener on the other side, and then you get there and it's not. But there is grass greener on the other side when it comes from being lost to Jesus.
Yeah.
But because as sinners we're blind, because we're dead in sin, we really can't see or fathom that there is greener grass on the other side. And once you came to know Jesus Christ as your Savior, your eyes are open to see things.
Yeah.
But, you know, she gave you an ultimatum, and regardless of what you wanted, God was definitely in it.
That's it.
God was having mercy and trying to reach out to you.
Yeah, he sure was. And he only had one shot with me. I was going to church. I was going to church on a Saturday night instead of going to the liquor store. and God knew He had to get me then, and it was it. So I told her deal. I made a deal with her. And I joke about it. I say I got dressed up in my best. I tell this every time I give my testimony. I had hair done on my shoulders, and a tie-dye T-shirt, a leather jacket, a pair of combat boots, ripped up blue jeans, and I went into the church that night.
Hey, you were styling at
Yes,
that day.
I'm almost like, all right, God, save me if you can. You know,
Yeah.
I thought all I got to do is sit through this,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I didn't even know what it was going to be. I
Just
thought,
sit through
I can sit through this.
Because you'd never been to church before, it sounds like.
Well, I had been now. I do need to back up and clarify a little bit. I didn't have any background, zero, none. Never to a vacation Bible school, never a church, never Easter, never a Christmas, never an Easter egg hunt, nothing until I was about 15 and a half. And me, my mom, and dad, we went to church over in Homemaker in that area. We went over there for a little while. And really got, now this is the thing that goes cross-grain with a lot of people, and I can't ever, this was our life. We went there. I mean, we all got in, you know, me, my mom and dad. You know, I don't know that we, you know, joined the church or signed our names or anything, but I saw a difference in my dad that I'd never seen before. Like I said, he was a good man anyway, but I saw him, you know,
The bar behind it got
yeah,
set a little higher
Yeah.
for him to think about.
yeah. I saw him read his Bible. I saw him get into church services. I saw my mom singing. They just got right into the fellowship, right into the body of Christ. All of us did. I felt different, you know, on the inside, and it lasted for about maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And it was a bit of a drive from Abingdon back over there to church. So we started missing a midweek service because, you know, it was a long drive and we all had to work and all that, and they had to work and school the next morning, blah, blah, blah. So we just lay out. So you miss one night, it makes it easier to miss another night. So, and that was kind of how it happened. And before you know it, we were completely out and just right back in the same.
I remember preaching one time when I first started preaching. I know this is going to sound cliche, I guess, but I preached on $5 worth.
Yeah.
And the story behind it was, you know, a lot of times we get in a hurry. We think we'll stop and get $5 worth of gas.
Yeah.
$5 don't get you very far. And, you know, we really need to fill up spiritually.
That's right.
The only way we can really do that is if we go to church when the doors are open. But I can feel a difference when I have to miss like a midweek service. Or like last Sunday, I got called out.
Yeah.
I left at 6 o'clock in the morning, got home at 3 o'clock in the evening, and I missed Sunday morning, and it just felt off.
Right. Yeah.
And it's that way though. That when you began to miss services, you began to think, well, I'm making $5.
Right. That's right. That's right.
But anyways, continue, please.
We had. So I went that night and I got there, sat down in the pew. There was something different. There were some guys, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 guys, had no idea what it was, but it was a teen challenge meeting is what it was. There were some guys that were from West Virginia. Probably some of your listeners have heard of Teen Challenge before. It's set up a little different now than what it was then. But up front, right in the choir, there was 2 rows of guys, black pants, white shirts, looked sharp, haircuts. I mean, they were just sharp looking guys, and they started singing, and they sung some of them old hymns, man. And they work. They still work.
Yeah,
they were singing. They would sing "Amazing Grace," and they got done singing. They sounded like angels, man. And they got done singing, and the first guy in line testified. And he said, I've been a drug addict for the last, 5, 10 years. Slept in my car, lost everything that I've had. And then they'd start singing, I'll Fly Away. And the next guy would testify. And he said, I eat out of trash cans. I've sold, I lost my job. I've sold everything that I've had to pay for my habits and my drug addiction. And I'm homeless, but Jesus saved me. And then they would sing another hymn, and then the next guy, and each one of them, at the end of each one of the testimonies, they'd say, but Jesus saved me, but Jesus saved me. turn my life around. It was all about the Lord had done. Just a very short, sweet testimony and of what God had done. And I looked at them and I looked at me and I thought they were doing the same things that I am, but they look a lot different than me. Something's really.
What is this whole
really
Jesus saying to me?
Yeah, and so then they got through singing and they got through testifying. The preacher got up to preach, and he said these words. It wasn't a big drawn out, wasn't a big long sermon, but he said, "You've poured." He said, "There's somebody here tonight." He said, "You have poured everything." He said, "There's a big void, a big hole in your life," and he said, "You've poured everything that the world has to offer into that void, into that hole." And he said, "Nothing has been big enough to fill it up." He said, "You poured drugs, you poured women, you poured cars, you poured money." He said, "You still feel empty." He said, "The only thing big enough to fill up that hole in your heart, that void in your life, is Jesus." He said, "If you want Jesus to fill your heart up right now," he said, "get up out of your pew and come to this altar and pray." And I did. You didn't have to come get me. You didn't have to beg me. I just got up. I thought, if cocaine, marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, all these pain pills, liquor, moonshine, if all of that can't fill this up, then I'll try Jesus. I told you I'd do anything. I was crazy.
But so that really speaks to how accurate that is, because people don't realize we do as humans. We really try to fill ourselves with joy and find happiness, and we do it with everything that the world has to offer. Not everybody gets into drugs, but they're still looking for something. And one day I was praying, and I remember the Lord just kind of illuminating me. That day that sin entered into the heart of Adam and Eve, there was a hole that was left in the human being. And people keep trying to fill that, but you cannot fill that, because it was the Spirit of God that filled that hole. And only God's Spirit can fill it back.